joining us. This month's webinar is going to be on wild pig management. It's going to be presented by Dr. Billy Higginbotham, Professor in Extension, Wildlife and Fishery Specialist at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Wildlife for Lunch webinars are made possible through funding by the San Antonio Livestock Exposition Incorporated, and they're hosted by the Texas Wildlife Association and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. With that, Dr. Higginbotham, I'll pass the controls over to you, and it is all yours.
Well, thank you, Clint, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a beautiful, crisp, cool fall day here in East Texas. Our trees are changing colors, but unfortunately, amidst all this fall beauty, we still have wild pigs to deal with. So we're going to run through a presentation. Go ahead and open up your sandwich or your see if we can teach a few things today, as well as maybe stir up a few questions for us to try to answer. You know, I've been dealing with wild pigs since about 1982 or 1983, and this dates back to a period in East Texas where wild pigs were very much a novelty in our area. In fact, a lot of people were just beginning to enjoy hunting wild pigs, and of course that gave them a big game species to hunt after deer season was closed. So in the early days, it was very much a novelty, but in the ensuing 30 years plus, we've learned an awful lot about pigs, and we've paid the price for some of our mistakes in terms of the destruction that they cause to landowners. To give you a little historical perspective, this is the native range of the Eurasian wild boar throughout Asia, throughout much of Europe, and in the United States and North America, this is an exotic species. It is not native to our part of the world at all. So it is an invasive exotic that was brought in. So we need to keep that in mind as we talk about this, especially in light of some of our native wildlife and competition that may occur. Now, wild pigs were brought in by Hernando de Soto, and even dating back to Columbus's second voyage, wild pigs were used as a kind of a mobile food source by the explorers, and they actually, Columbus and some of the other explorers after him seeded some islands in the Caribbean with pigs, so future expeditions could stop and pick some up. And of course, they would just herd those pigs along during their expeditions on their quest for gold and silver in most cases. But they had a lot of good attributes that made them a very ready food source for the exploration parties that passed through much of the southern United States. Hernando de Soto gets credit for actually introducing wild pigs into what is now the United States. He picked up 13 pigs that I guess were ancestors from some of Columbus's second voyage stockings, and he brought those pigs to what is now Tampa Bay, Florida, in 1539. When he died on the banks of the Mississippi River 3 years later, the pig herd that he started with grew to 700. And then that expedition headed straight for Texas. Didn't like what they saw when they got to the Austin, San Antonio area. Of course, we from A&M can understand why they didn't like what they found in Austin. Turned around and headed back the way they came. But that's how our pigs first got a start. A little terminology here, and this is courtesy of my colleague Jack Mayer in South Carolina. What do we call these things? You hear all sorts of names, feral hogs, wild pigs, on and on and on. Well, every slice of bacon and every piece of ham that you consume today came from that common ancestor, the Eurasian wild boar. That's where all the breeding can be traced back to. They were domesticated 8,000 to 10,000 years ago in several points of origin in Southeast Asia and Europe. And certainly they were domesticated, and here in the United States, they were free-ranged in many of the bottomland areas for many, many years and gathered up and driven to market once a year. So we had domestic pigs gone wild, and of course these are feral hogs. But at the same time, we have had purposeful introductions of the Eurasian wild boar from its native ranges and habitats into the United States, and this all began in about 1890 in New Hampshire. So we've had the introduction of Eurasian wild boar in a number of states. Obviously, they will hybridize or cross readily with the domesticated pig gone wild, the feral hog. So most of what we have today are going to be hybrids at best, and many of them are just going to be feral hogs from domestic lines. So probably the proper name to refer to these things is wild pigs. It's in many parts of the country, we've got mixed ancestry. Wild pigs, they have a tremendous sense of smell. You know, they're not blind, but certainly the sense of smell from a trapping and hunting standpoint is something we have to be aware of. You can beat a pig's eyes, you can beat a pig's ears, but you'll never beat a pig's nose, so we have to be aware of that. So a very interesting animal, very intelligent animal, and quite an adversary when they're causing damage on your property. You know, I don't see many marble statues erected here in the States for wild pigs, but that's exactly what they do over in Europe. This is a game animal in Europe that dates back at least to Roman times, when hunting was of the wild boar was very highly regarded sport. So they have quite a different perspective of the wild pig than what we have here in the States. I have found one good use for them, though, and that is food source for our national emblem. And then I was quite surprised here recently to run across some what I'll call yuppie dog food that contained wild boar and brown rice formula. So there is yet another positive use of our wild pig populations here in the state. But if you're a landowner in Texas and you have wild pigs using your property, damage and problems are more the norm than any positive attributes that they may bring to the table. Of course, this is in East Texas. We have beef cattle country over here where we raise warm season perennial grasses. When you have this kind of damage, it really makes a mess of being able to graze livestock or roll hay off of that. This is here at the A&M Center at Overton, where I'm headquartered, and we deal with the same problems that many landowners deal with across the state of Texas in terms of pasture damage. That was a hay roll. If you remember back in 2010, 2011, in the worst part of the drought, you'll very well recall if you were buying hay, what you were having to pay. And so that can run into a great expense as well. And it's not just limited to standing forage or hay. Certainly our row crops, you name the crop, it could be grain sorghum, it could be peanuts. In blackland country here in the central part of Texas, you can hardly get your corn crop in the ground, and the pigs are just right behind you, rooting up the seed immediately after planting. So a lot of row crop damage in the areas of Texas and other areas in the South in particular, where there's a lot of damage done there. Even some of our commercial orchards, such as peach orchards, they're breaking the scaffold limbs off the trees to get to the peaches, as well as destructing the irrigation systems that often are used in conjunction with these trees and orchards. But as the populations have increased, another phenomenon that we've noticed is that we're seeing more and more roadkill pigs every year in the state of Texas. And, you know, you take a dark-colored pig on a dark road on a cloudy or no-moon night, their eyes don't reflect like a deer does in headlights, and you will literally not see those pigs in time. According to one study, the average damage caused to a vehicle with a wild pig collisions in the neighborhood of $1,400. That study's several years old, so the damage estimates, I'm sure, have gone up. And unfortunately, here in the state of Texas, we have had some human fatalities as a result of vehicle-pig collisions. So it's a real human safety concern. But pigs don't just damage agriculture. The only place they had left to move in Texas was to town, and that's exactly what they've done. So suburban areas, even a few of our urban areas, are seeing some of the damages to pigs, from pigs to landscapes. And that's kind of interesting. This particular lady called and asked me to come out and take a look, and she wanted to know if that was armadillo damage to her yard. My response was, if that's an armadillo, it must be the size of a Volkswagen. This is on a ranch. You can see how they plowed that ground just across from the main ranch house. And on the left, you see a very, very nice pond, at least part of it, and a very nice bass lake. And the result's going to be when the rains come is that water is going to become turbid, and suspended clay particles can literally destroy that fishery. So this is a case where wild pigs are definitely having an impact in terms of water quality in that particular body of water. In our recreational areas, whether they be sports fields or golf courses, the damage can be severe. Golf course superintendents really get excited. They tell me that it may take $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to construct one of these golf greens, and so damage on those greens can be severe. And where our kids and grandkids play on playgrounds, this is kind of a sobering thought that you may have pigs out there when our children may be out enjoying themselves in those areas. This is actually a hospital lawn on the right, and that hospital sits on the loop in Palestine, Texas. It's got a 4-lane loop with a median, and the pigs are running back and forth from the hospital over to the doctor's offices across the street, doing damage there, as you see on the left, and getting run over on the loop in between. So it's quite an issue in some of our suburban areas. And these pigs have even gone to church, but I'm not sure it's in order to repent for their sins. So what is all of this rooting behavior about? Well, wild pigs will basically eat anything that contains a calorie. And so they're rooting to find roots, tubers, grubs, worms. They're really the perfect omnivore. That is, they'll feed on plant matter, which makes up about 85 or 90% of their diet. They can serve as a predator, feeding on small animals, but also perhaps predating on fawns and other small mammals. And they'll scavenge. So we're not going to starve wild pigs out in most cases. I was amazed here in East Texas during the height of the drought in the summer of 2011, when everything was suffering due to the heat and dry conditions, that the pigs we were trapping were still sleek and fat. They were finding something to eat when virtually there was nothing else for any other critters out there to eat. Pigs were still making a living. Water quality issues, both from a turbidity standpoint, as I described, as well as contributing to bacterial loading in our waterways. These are also concerns, and while many animals contribute to that bacterial loading, wild pigs, by their nature of using in these areas. Now, this is some information that I've gathered over the last 6 or 7 years that just kind of paints a picture of the types of damage that Texas landowners are being affected with. And 75% of the landowners surveyed indicated that pasture and hay meadow damage was a major concern. But you move over to the far right of that graph, and you've got 39% of our landowners that responded said that they're having to take their valuable time and use it to correct damage pigs have caused or try to control wild pigs when they could be spending that time on something else. And even land values and lease values are considered to decline by 23 and 21% of landowners respectively that reported back to us, and that had wild pigs on that property. So they can decrease land value, and they can certainly decrease lease value from a standpoint of the value of that land for leasing for perhaps recreational purposes. So this is quite a change from the 70s and early 80s, when many people looked at wild pigs' presence on property as being a value-added amenity. Hopefully we've turned the corner on that situation. We also conducted a survey in 2010 to kind of get a handle on the characterization of how these pigs are being removed. We estimated that about 753,000 pigs are removed annually from the state of Texas. Now that's out of an estimated population of 2.6 million animals. That represents about 29% of the pig population removed in 2010 by human control. And we really need to be removing about 66% of a population annually here in Texas in order just to hold it stable. Not increasing or decreasing, just to hold it stable. As you can see, trapping, all types of trapping represented about 57% of the pigs removed, and all forms of Shooting, aerial gunning, hunting, and strategic shooting represented about 35%. So between trapping and shooting, about 92% of our pigs are removed by those two methods, at least during 2010 from our survey respondents. Now, I will tell you that if you're trying to manage your property for native wildlife, be it quail, turkey, white-tailed deer, whatever, if you're managing for native wildlife, your tolerance for wild pigs needs to be very, very low. They will impact from a standpoint of competition for food, space, whatever the case may be. In fact, as you can see from the text, there's a considerable overlap in the fall between deer and wild pigs, primarily for that mast resource, acorns, for example. But let's say you're sitting there in your deer stand. We've been in the deer season a couple of weeks now, and you're waiting for it to get daylight. And you look out from your deer stand, and you see pigs that can cause damage to those feeders. And obviously, they're not only consuming that feed, but they're also damaging the equipment itself. And so you want to try to curb that as much as possible, because obviously they not only consume much of that feed source, whether it be shelled corn or protein. Here in the state of Texas, it is legal to bait or feed wildlife, native wildlife that is non-migratory. And so you want to avoid giving them those additional supplements if at all possible. Some things we know deer and pigs share millions of acres of habitat in the southeastern United States. Here in Texas alone, it's estimated to be that they share about 83 million acres just in our state. And we feel like a good bit of this deer supplement, which is 300 million pounds of shelled corn and over 100 million pounds of protein supplement, is fed to native wildlife every year. And we feel like a good bit of that may be going to non-targets, and in this case, wild pigs. I submit that we are probably making our wild pig problem worse by allowing pigs to have access to that supplement meant primarily, let's say, for white-tailed deer. Reason for that is when these sows improve their nutritional condition and on a higher nutritional plane in terms of feed, they're able to produce more eggs. They'll have larger litters of pigs, and in that increased physiological state, more of those pigs will probably survive. Now, this is Texas. We're not going to stop feeding white-tailed deer. I understand that. But there are some things that we can do to prevent those wild pigs from accessing that supplement. Also, the food issue aside, behaviorally, deer just don't want to be around wild pigs. You're sitting there overlooking an oak flat and deer feeding on acorns, or a food plot, or perhaps at a feeder, and the deer are out in front, and they take off, and then the pigs show up. They just don't want to associate with them, so it's kind of a negative behavior by deer when pigs are in the area. Now, one thing that you want to be able to do is to differentiate between wild pig tracks and other species, particularly white-tailed deer, because hopefully you'll see the sign that pigs are on the property before the damage actually begins to occur. And the track is going to be more rounded on a pig, and you'll see that the dew claw prints will often also be there. When comparing it to a deer, of course, the deer are a little more pointed, and so it should be fairly easy to differentiate between the two. Now, once a track gets to be about 5 or 6 inches in diameter, then that pretty well means it's going to be a pig, not a deer. Other signs that you can look for are wallows in areas that stay wet. You can see those pigs wallow in the mud. They love to rub on creosote or highline poles, and so you can see mud or hair attached to those posts. They'll even rub on trees, and you can see where they rub this pine tree almost all the way down, and they'll also rub mud on those trees. My rule of thumb is when the mud on a tree reaches my belt height, I turn around and go look for a smaller pig to deal with. Now, these pigs are creatures of habits, and they'll also often use the same runs, and this is an interstate highway for wild pigs right here, so this may be a good candidate location to be able to hang a snare. But look for these type areas, and when you can see that hair on that bottom strand of barbed wire, or in particular, when you see mud on that bottom strand, nothing else out there is going to leave that mud on that bottom strand like a wild pig. So it should be pretty easy to pick up the signs that those pigs are there. Where are your pigs right now? It's noon throughout Texas. These pigs are laying up in cover. They're throughout the summer, and anytime it's dry, they're always going to be close to water. Pigs have to have access to water, but they're going to be in the heaviest daytime cover they can find that provides shade and security where they're not being harassed. Now, they may range out a mile from that secure cover at night in order to forage, but they're going to be pretty much in a safe haven during the daylight hours. In fact, I'm shocked today when I see a wild pig during daylight hours. You can have a considerable pig presence on your property and never see one during daylight. So you need to be able to recognize that sign. So let's talk about this expansion that's occurred. In 1982, there were 17 states with wild pig populations. In 2004, there were 28 states, and this year we're up to 36 states. In those 36 states, represents 47% of the U.S. counties with wild pigs. So that's quite a bit of coverage throughout the U.S. and also represents over 100% increase in distribution in the last 3 decades. So I created what I call a wild pigs and DEFCON system. You might remember the DEFCON rating system, Defense Readiness Condition, that the Joint Chiefs of Staff created back in the 50s during the Cold War days. And so I've modified this for use with wild pigs. And if you're at DEFCON 5, you've got no wild pigs in that state, life's good, and all you want to do is monitor and make sure that you don't get in the wild pig business. DEFCON 4, you've got newer isolated populations established in that state, and certainly for that state, the goal should be eradication. DEFCON 3 is established but stable populations, and again, you may be able to get ahead of them with concerted effort using our control methods available to us and eradicate those populations. When we get down to DEFCON 2, we're beginning to sound the alarm bell because they're not only established, they're expanding, and at this stage, we're trying to abate damage and stop that expansion by all means possible. And then you get to DEFCON 1, welcome to Texas. Widely distributed, large populations, and we are just in the business of abating damage. With the current tools we have in hand today, we cannot hope to eradicate wild pig populations. But we have conducted some in-depth studies with landowners that have shown we're able to reduce agricultural lands damage by as much as 66% economic value. Now, that's not eradication, but if we can reduce the economic impact by 2/3, that's a step in the right direction. So here is the DEFCON map where you can see all the states at once. The blue represents no pig populations all the way down to white. Poor old Mississippi there, or they're on the brink of becoming a white state, and their legislature has become very proactive beginning in about September to where they've got the luxury of looking at what's happened to many of the other white-colored states. And so they've taken a very proactive approach to try to get a handle on their pigs and to knock them back to where they don't have these large expanding populations like many of these other states in white have. Now, everything you see in green is potential wild pig habitat in the state of Texas, and this is a modeling map that my colleague Roel Lopez at the Institute for Renewable Natural Resources at A&M developed. And basically everything in green pigs can occupy. The truth of the matter is that everything is occupied except one of our 254 counties, and that's El Paso County. And it's not to say those pigs are not there, they just have not been documented in that one county. Wild pigs have been documented at one time or another in the rest of the 253 counties in the state. So the question comes up, how did we get so many so fast? What happened when in the 70s they were quite a novelty, and even early 80s and then an explosion occurred beginning in about the mid-1980s. Well, as I mentioned, they're general omnivores. They'll feed on plant matter, they can predate on other animals, and they can also scavenge. So they're the perfect eating machine in terms of built for survival. They're smart. They're a whole lot smarter than a white-tailed deer. These indiscriminate stockings have absolutely killed us in Texas and in many of the other northern tier of states. Now, you saw the DEFCON map, and you saw how some of those northern states had pig populations, and you might ask, well, how did they get there? Well, they didn't walk there. Pigs don't walk 500 or 1,000 miles. They don't fly. You've heard the saying, when pigs fly. But they do trailer extremely well. And these indiscriminate, illegal stockings that have occurred not only in Texas, but into many, many other states have created this huge expansion in range. And big mistake that it was ever done, but it's been done, and we're paying the price now. I talked about the supplementally feeding and the ability for wild pigs to help themselves to some of that as a non-target and the impacts that it has. And certainly pigs are not born pregnant, but of all the large mammals found worldwide, they have the highest reproductive rate. And so when you put all these factors together, it created what I'll call the perfect storm in the late 70s through the mid 80s and put us on the road that we find ourselves on now. But there's some myths out there about wild pigs that perhaps we need to try to bust. And here's one that you often hear, that the populations double every 4 months. Well, left unchecked, the population models show it's more like about every 5 years, but we're trying not to leave those populations unchecked. Sows have 3 litters per year and 12 pigs per litter. While that is physiologically possible, the average is 1.5 litters a year with between 5 and 6 pigs per litter. Now, is that to say you won't see a sow with 12 pigs? Absolutely, you'll see that, but that's not the norm. And the pigs that have more of a domestic blood background tend to have a little bit larger litter size than those pigs that have more of a Eurasian wild pig background genetically. 4 million pigs in the state of Texas? No, based on our recent estimates where we've been able to cobble together some of the population estimates done in different parts of the state, we think we're closer to about 2.6 million. That's plenty. We certainly like to see that number go down. Now, there are some natural predators out there for wild pigs. I don't think anybody wants to increase the coyote population, but certainly they are taking a fair number of these fairly young piglets, and we see that quite often. We even have some bobcats show up at some of our locations. You have critters showing up to eat the bait, and then you have critters that show up to eat the critters that are showing up to eat the bait. And then in some areas, southeast Oklahoma, for example, where you've got some range overlap between black bears and wild pigs, that there is some predation by bears upon those pigs. And then even mountain lions are using some of these pigs, and that's a pretty good sized boar right there that mountain lion's after. I think this was taken just west of Waco. No, actually, I'm just kidding. It was actually taken in Florida, so I don't want to get anybody too upset. Are there disease problems that we need to concern ourselves with wild pigs? Well, absolutely. There's probably about 15 diseases that they will commonly carry, maybe not all at once or maybe not all pigs, but the two that seem to bubble to the surface the most in our discussions on diseases are pseudorabies, which is a herpes virus, and it can be passed on to livestock and domestic dogs, for example. Wildlife Services has documented that working with Animal Health Commission, that there have been some livestock, some cattle deaths as a result of pseudorabies that was passed from wild pigs. And the zoonotic that we have to really be concerned with as humans is brucellosis. It's a bacteria that anytime you handle a wild pig in the field dressing process, handle the reproductive tract, it's in the blood, that you have the opportunity that if that pig happens to be carrying brucellosis, If you were to get a cut on your hand, for example, or not be wearing eyewear, something like that, that it is possible to contract it. Seems like we have 1 or 2 cases every year in the state, and once you've got it, you've got it. Physicians can control the symptoms with medication, but you'll carry that brucellosis with you the rest of your life. And the big problem, I think, that from a non-human standpoint, is these wild pigs can pass this to cattle and trigger a false positive test in cattle for brucellosis, which means that the rancher has to pin up their cattle to have more extensive testing done. So by triggering that false positive, it can certainly cost ranchers a lot of time and money. Animal Health Commission blood tests have shown that about 10% of the pigs they've tested statewide had been exposed to brucellosis at some point in their lives, and about 20% to pseudo rabies. And so it's really simple. If you trap and kill pigs for your own consumption, or you like to hunt pigs and put that meat on the table, no problem. Just wear some latex or rubber gloves during the field dressing process, wear some eyewear, wash your knives and saws in hot soapy water, and of course, pork being pork, get it cooled down as quickly as possible, and then when it's cooked, cook it to about 165 to 170 degree internal temperature minimum, and you should be good to go. Okay, fact or fiction. Shooting, trapping, snaring, and catch dogs are the only legal control options for wild pigs. Well, I'll ask everybody to think about that for just a second. Think about if we're leaving something out, and then we'll move forward and reinforce the fact that there are no toxicants, no products out there that you can legally put out with the expressed intent of killing wild pigs. You hear lots and lots of talk about different things that have been used, and let me assure you that there is no product out there commercially available in the United States that is legal for you to put out for wild pigs. Now, there's some great research being done by a number of agencies. USDA, APHIS, Wildlife Services is involved in some toxicant research. Texas Parks and Wildlife is involved with the same research on looking at toxicants. And hopefully we'll have some toxicants available in the not too distant future, but there's a very rigorous testing procedure and protocol that these products have to go through. And there's multiple agencies and universities, not only in Texas, but in other parts of the U.S. that are involved. So hopefully we'll have that extra tool in the hands of landowners at some point, but it is not there yet, except on an experimental basis that is very, very closely monitored and controlled. So let's pause for just a second, Clint, and see if anybody has a question that we might want to answer at this point before we move into the control section of the presentation.
Sounds great. I had one question come in, but it's in regards to corral traps, and so I'll hold off just a second on that one,
okay,
see if you don't cover it
all right,
in your next section. Right now, I don't have any questions that were posted, so if I were you, I would just continue on, and if anybody has any questions, we'll pick it up on the second half.
Thank you. Well, we'll move forward then, and maybe everybody's finished lunch and moved on to dessert. So we'll talk about control options, and I suppose you could get an alligator that you saw, but that may have its own consequences. But we're seeing more and more net wire go up in the eastern part of Texas, more than I've ever seen in the last 3 or 4 years than the previous 30-plus years I've worked for Extension. And while this is not reducing the pig numbers, it is excluding those pigs from some high-value areas, whether it be a garden or some other crop or what have you. So we're seeing some net wire fencing being used successfully to exclude pigs from certain areas. And again, that doesn't reduce the population, but it does perhaps reduce the damage to that property. We're also seeing electric fence being used. My colleague Tyler Campbell conducted a study back in the 1990s, I believe, that they looked at using 2 hot wires, one at 8 inches above the ground, the second at 18 inches above the ground, And while it wasn't 100% barrier, it certainly helped dissuade pigs from going through that fence to another area. There's also some electric fence configurations on the Gallagher Fence website that they've conducted some research jointly with Stephen F. Austin State University. So Tyler Campbell's two-strand design of 8 and 18 inches, and then there's, as I said, some designs for a number of wildlife species on the Gallagher Fence website that they did in concert with SFA. Might be worth taking a look at if you are considering trying to use a barrier approach. Now, my daughter thinks she's the champion wild pig killer of all times, but I will tell you, we are not going to control a wild pig population through recreational hunting. There's been about a dozen studies done in the South. They remove anywhere from about 8 to 55% of a population through recreational hunting. Throughout all those studies, it averages about 24% of the population. Here in Texas, during our 2010 survey that I showed you those data earlier, we average about 11% of our wild pig population removed annually through recreational hunting. We need to be removing 2/3, and if we're removing 11% in the state of Texas, recreational hunting in and of itself is not the answer. Now, with that said, there may be some equipment that's a little more effective than others, and quite honestly, we need to separate recreational hunting from what I'll term strategic shooting. And strategic shooting can be a very effective method of removing wild pigs, and it's used quite commonly over here in the eastern half of the state where we've got so much vegetative cover, and aerial gunning by helicopter can be limited except to those areas that have some fairly open country. And, you know, you may or may not want to get permitted by ATF to have a noise suppressor on a rifle, but certainly many people have availed themselves to taking advantage of some of the night vision technology that's out there. Why is it successful? Pigs are going to be most active at night, and if they're out moving in open areas where you can visibly find those pigs, then certainly this can be a technique that will be very, very successful. Now, by strategic shooting, I mean using that technique, not sitting on a deer stand and waiting for the pigs maybe to come by, but to be aggressive and work on those pigs from a standpoint of trying to reduce damage by reducing population numbers. So let me give you an idea of what I mean by strategic shooting. If you see the sign or you see the damage, then go ahead and put some bait down and maybe hang a game camera. Hope everybody's got one. If not, you need to get one, because they'll come in very handy for not only strategic shooting, but for trapping. And try to get an idea of when those pigs are coming. Of course, the cameras have a date stamp on them and a time stamp, and so you'll be able to pattern those pigs. And if you're baiting a half dozen areas on your property and you get those pigs patterned, you don't want to sit out there all night waiting on them, swatting mosquitoes in the summer or shivering in the winter. And so it kind of narrows your window of time that you have to spend out there waiting on those pigs. Once we have our sites baited and have our pigs on bait, sometimes people will put up blinds. These blinds are always downwind. You've got to come in from downwind. Or if you just approach on foot, you've still got to be able to come in from downwind to where those pigs cannot scent you. And a lot of people will use these little very handy landscape lights that are solar powered, and even on the darkest night you will be able to pick up those pigs in a conventional rifle scope or a crossbow scope, whatever it is that you're planning on using. So they cast enough light to pick up the pig, but don't spook the animals so they become accustomed to them. And here's a situation where you see the light is shining on the bait. We're coming in from the left, which is going to be downwind, and we'll be able to ease up there within range to be able to remove some of those pigs. Here's a situation where on June 14th, 2012, the pigs were showing up at 28 minutes after midnight. We had them patterned. We had our shooters show up about midnight the next night coming in from downwind, and was able to take that one boar. Now, that's a pretty good sized boar, regardless of what part of the state you're in, but it weighed over 300 pounds, and so strategic shooting can definitely be a very effective tool. Aerial control, this has gotten a lot of press in the last couple of years when the pork chopper bill passed in September, I believe, of 2011. That allowed helicopter services to sell that seat to gunners, individuals that could go up. They would take you up and allow you to shoot pigs from the air. Wildlife Services here in Texas removes about 25,000 wild pigs every year, and about half of those pigs that they remove are by aerial gunning from helicopter. Now, at $750 an hour, it sounds like, well, that's going to be a very expensive proposition. But Wildlife Services is so efficient when conditions are right that they're able to remove enough pigs that they often knock that cost of pig removed down by aerial gunning down in the range of $15 to $18 per pig removed. So with trained gunners, the right equipment, the right conditions, it can be a very, very effective technique. Snares. I don't think wild pigs ever catch on to snares, but it's a one pig at a time proposition. The good news is you can set a lot of them because they're fairly inexpensive. Many of them are constructed where they have stops where they won't close down if you were to catch a deer or catch the neighbor's dog. But the thing about snares is you've got to be very, very careful where you set them because of the potential for non-target catches. Now, no one's going to be concerned if they catch a coyote in a snare. But if you catch white-tailed deer or if you catch, like I say, domestic dogs, that could be an issue. So you've got to read the sign very, very carefully about what animals are using that particular trail. Now here, this pig was caught from a snare that was hanging from a fence. It wasn't tied to the fence. It was just hanging from the fence. So don't secure your snare to a fence unless you like to rebuild fence because it can be a problem. Now this is obviously going to require, in most cases, for you to be able to discharge a firearm when you do catch a pig in that snare. So that may limit its use in some of the urban and suburban areas, municipalities that have firearm restrictions. Dogs can be very effective. A lot of times people will shoot and trap as many pigs as they can, and then if they've got pigs that are just not subject to trapping, they'll put dogs on those pigs. And again, most of the time it's a one pig at a time proposition, but certainly the use of trained catch dogs has its role. So we've talked about snaring, we've talked about shooting, we've talked about the use of catch dogs. The fourth method of legal wild pig control in Texas and the United States is trapping. And trapping is the landowner's first line of defense. And if you wonder who said that, I said that. I think day in and day out, for most landowners, this is going to be your best opportunity to remove the most pigs in the shortest period of time possible. All these other methods have their place, but I think for individual landowners, you've got to consider trapping. Now, you've got two ways you can go with trapping, and I'll categorize the first group as those that have a remote trip trigger. Now, I've listed the companies that I know of that market these devices. There may be some others. If you know of others, please type in the chat box and give me the names of those companies. All of these traps can be triggered remotely by cell phone, by several different methods. You're able, in some cases, to monitor what's inside the trap and allow you to trip it. You may be 150 miles away. So it can be a very, very valid use of technology, and these systems can be super efficient. I've talked to a number of individuals that use these methods, and they're very pleased with the technology that's there. So certainly if you want to avail yourself to this technology, it's out there. I encourage you to visit with these numerous companies that are in that business, and it can be a really good way to reduce pig populations. Of course, that technology does come at a cost, but certainly the efficiency in many cases may outweigh that. So I encourage you that if you're if you're interested in pursuing these remote tripped trigger type traps, that technology is there, and follow up on it. Do a little more investigating, because many of them work very, very well. But for many, many landowners out there, I think they're not going to invest in that technology. They want to get by as inexpensively as they possibly can, and I've spent a good bit of time trying to work on trap designs that can be constructed from commonly available materials, that can be efficient, and that can be least cost to the landowner. And so we're going to talk about these mechanical trip trigger and trap designs in this section. But regardless of the type trap you're using, whether it's one of the remote tripped traps or one of the mechanical trip traps, trapping is very much a process. You know, in the early 80s, we could throw a little corn out there, put down a box trap, and often catch pigs in a couple of days. I believe those days are gone. We've eliminated those pigs largely from the gene pool, I think, and we've got to be very proactive and very efficient at how we go about this, and it is very much following what I'll term as a set of best management practices in order to be successful. The last thing we want you to do if you're being damaged by pigs is get frustrated after a few days and give up. So we're going to try to give you some of those best management practices to where you can be successful at curbing your pig population. The biggest problem I see landowners make is the tendency to want to set that trap right where the damage is. In reality, what you want to do is backtrack those pigs and get as close to their daytime cover as possible, and set up upwind with that trap and bait, so that scent of that bait can carry down to that daytime cover and allow those pigs to come into that area and make them more trappable. So don't concentrate right on where the damage is. We're going to follow along in a commercial peach orchard, and I'll show you this set of best management practices. Of course, the pigs were coming in to eat the peaches and breaking scaffold limbs, and we backtracked the pigs, and we actually found that they were in this area here on the side of a hill in a sweet gum thicket, and then under the cover of darkness, they would move out into the orchard and break limbs and consume peaches. So since the pigs were already on the peaches as bait, since the pigs were eating the peaches, we just went ahead and started pre-baiting with peaches. And it's very important to get those pigs on bait. So what we did is we started piling the peaches over closer to the pigs' daytime habitat. And once we saw that the peaches were being removed, then we were ready to move to the next step. Let's talk a little bit about pig baits. There's all kinds of baits out there, commercial and homemade. Shelled corn's the gold standard, but everything out there eats shelled corn. So you may want to ferment that corn or milo or rice. Certainly, most of these baits have a olfactory or smell factor to them, and so that can enhance their capability of drawing pigs to that bait source. Now, what you don't want to do is use the same bait on every location. If you're using shelled corn in one location, on another spot, use dry dog food. Perhaps use a commercial bait in a third spot, and change it up. Pigs don't respond to the same bait seasonally year after year after year. So what worked in January, February may not work in August. So be experimental, change it up a little bit, and then we'll often freshen or mix with these baits some berry spray or soda. There's some study data that shows that raspberry, strawberry flavoring, Jello, or soda pop will attract pigs, and you can incorporate that with your bait. I've seen maple syrup added to baits. I've seen vanilla extract added to baits because of the aroma that can enhance that. So don't get stuck in a rut with your bait. Now here is one recipe for fermenting bait that I believe came out of University of Georgia, but they're just actually mixing corn and sugar and yeast. We're not making whiskey here. We are making a pig bait, putting it in a metal trash can, setting it out in the sun for a few weeks, and letting it ferment. I'll warn you in advance, don't spill any of this concoction on your clothes while you're putting it out to try to bait pigs. But Be creative. Don't get stuck in a rut when it comes to baits. Oftentimes what we'll do is we'll cut some foot-long sticks of 2-inch diameter PVC, cap the ends, drill holes in the sides, stuff it full of cotton balls, and then we'll mix up some of that berry-flavored soda or gelatin with water and pour it in there and then hang it up in the trap where the scent can carry downwind to those pigs' daytime cover. And so that can also help you out. Once we've got the pigs on bait, we then hang our trail camera on that site. And people often ask me what kind of trail cameras I recommend. I recommend the ones that work. And so that's by experience and testing on your part. There's a lot of good cameras out there. There's probably 35 or 40 manufacturers now. And there's different sites you can go to. For example, trailcampro.com does a lot of testing of different cameras, looking at efficiency, trigger speed, battery life. So if you're interested in comparing the camera you have now to maybe a camera that you're considering buying, a different brand perhaps, then go to trailcampro.com, and they've got a lot of data where they've conducted tests, and you can compare for yourselves and see what camera best suits your purposes. Once you've got that those pigs on bait, then the next step is to determine how many pigs are in that particular sounder. A family group of pigs is called a sounder. In this case, we've determined that we've got an even dozen pigs in this sounder that's causing the problem in that peach orchard. Why is that important? That's going to tell you how large a trap you need to construct to catch the pigs you're dealing with. So how large does your trap need to be? Will this size do? And I'll tell you up front, I'm not a fan of box traps. I started using them in the early 80s. Oftentimes we would catch 3 pigs and have 6 standing around on the outside. In my old age, I've become greedy, and now I want to catch them all in as few trap nights as possible. If your camera data does show you've only got 1 pig or 2 pigs or whatever, and you feel like you can use a box trap, that's fine. Take the floor out of it, because that will limit pigs going in there. They don't like stepping on that metal. So take the floor out of it if you're going to use a box trap, and stake it down really, really well. In some cases, you may need a trap this size, and this particular trap's got about 8 or 10 16-foot panels in it. The more pigs you have in that sounder, the larger trap you want to employ. The reason for that is you want to maximize the distance between this gate and back, in this case, the tripwire where that trigger's located. What you want to have happen is enough room for the last pig to get in before the first pig ventures to the back and trips the trigger. And in many cases, with a large number of pigs, that's going to require a larger trap. Now, several characteristics of this trap that, regardless of the size, corral trap, and that's what you're looking at here, several characteristics will apply regardless of the size trap that you're going to build. Notice those T-posts. They're only about 4 or 5 feet apart. These panels are 5 foot tall, and they have 4-inch by 4-inch mesh. Now, 4 foot tall panels are not tall enough. You need these 5 foot panels. They come in either 16 or 20 foot lengths. They typically cost $45 to $50 a piece for the 16-foot lengths and $50 to $60 for the 20-foot lengths. Doesn't matter which one you use, but you need T-posts every 4 or 5 feet. You need the 4-inch mesh. You need to secure these panels to those T-posts at the bottom, middle, and top of that post. And go ahead and overlap your panels 1 or 2 squares at each junction where your panels overlap. And that way you've got a good firm connection between those panels. And of course, the T-posts are on the outside of the panels because the pressure will be coming from within. So these are some characteristics that you need to employ regardless of the size trap. I will not build a corral trap with fewer than 4 panels. That's my absolute minimum. Now, I've got traps that have 6, 8, and in this case 10 panels, but 4 panels will be a good size trap if you're dealing with a sounder that's got 8 or 10 pigs in it, but that's the absolute smallest that I'll build. Once we've got our pigs on camera, we're going to start erecting that trap, and you will notice during this process you may put those pigs off for a few days because those panels and those T-posts were not there. Suddenly they've appeared, and it may put those pigs off bait for a few days. But be patient, keep baiting, and they'll tend to come back in. You notice where the gate's going to go, we've splayed it open, left a fairly wide opening to where those pigs will feel comfortable entering into that trap. What we'll do is we'll progressively put more bait here to begin with and a little bit of bait here, and then we'll flip-flop that as we get the pigs trained to bait. We'll put less on the outside and more on the inside, and we'll put that bait further and further back into the trap to get those pigs trained to going in and out and feel comfortable going back there. So you've got to train them to go in, and then you've got to train them to go all the way back, and that is going to contribute to your success. Let's talk a minute about gates. There are lots and lots of gate designs out there. The so-called continuous catch gates that even after they close, more pigs could push in include the saloon gate, the rooter gate, and the swinging door gate. Now, the fact of the matter is, based on some data from a study conducted, I believe, at Auburn University, is these continuous catch gates don't continuous catch. In other words, you're going to capture what you're going to capture on the first trip. And so for this reason, I've gone back to guillotine gates on most of my traps because I was afraid early on that it was costing me pigs. Once the gate closed, more pigs could not push in if I used a guillotine gate. Based on this study that has shown that you're going to catch basically what you're going to catch on the first trip, I've gone back to that guillotine gate. And you don't need a gate for every trap you set up. You can share one gate among multiple traps, so that can further cut your cost. But I can build a guillotine gate for $100, and that's the gate and frame you see there, and that's all treated wood. And that's sometimes a quarter or a third the cost of some of these manufactured gates. I've used them all. They work very well. But by going back to this guillotine gate, I've cut costs. I've also created an opening with that 4x8 sheet of plywood almost 4 feet wide. And I think that's an asset to have a wider opening. There, see here, just the spring of the panel, the pigs can push in, and then it sort of closes behind them. What we found is that particularly large pigs don't like tight spots, and they don't like areas they have to push through. Now, with this design, I can catch a lot of pigs, but typically they weigh less than 100 pounds. And if you'll take a camera and point it over at what's showing up but what's not going in, you often have larger pigs that are coming to the bait but won't venture into the trap. So it cuts costs by using this design, but I think it may be costing you pigs. The only way to know for sure is to hang a camera on the outside and see what's going on. Now, this is my pride and joy that the guys here at the A&M Center built for me. And what makes it so effective is you see I've got my two little pig silhouettes up there at the top. But actually this is a little bit of a funnel-shaped saloon door gate, again, wider to be able to decrease the time that it takes to train those pigs to bait. We actually had a graduate student conduct a gate width study last year, and what he found is gate width did not affect catch rates, but what I do believe gate width does is it reduces the training time to get those pigs going into that bait. In fact, we've had some trips where multiple pigs tried to go through some narrow gates at the same time and would prematurely trip those gates. You wouldn't catch the entire sounder. So for multiple reasons, I do believe that a wider gate, when possible, is going to be advantageous to you in your trapping. Okay, this is just a 4x8 sheet of plywood turned sideways, so that's going to be a really wide opening, almost 8 feet in width, and using it in conjunction here with a tire trigger. You know, notice we've got kind of a teardrop shape design. This is because we load all our pigs out and haul them to a buying station. So if you're planning on shooting the pigs in the trap, it really doesn't matter what the design is, although if you've got 90-degree corners and tight spots, you do need to cover those areas because pigs use corners just like you and I use a step ladder. So it's important to cover those tight spots and cover those corners We use this teardrop shape because we plan to trailer these pigs to a buying station and at least recoup part of our trapping costs. So we're baiting. We still got our panels open. We've set our gate, but our gate's wired open. And we get the pigs coming in, and they're cleaning up the bait further and further back into the trap. We've captured them. This is where the camera comes in handy by letting you know when those pigs are routinely entering that trap and venturing further and further back into it. And basically, when you get to that point, you get to pick the day you're going to trap pigs. Now, when these sows show up that look like they're about to have pigs, you've got a fairly narrow window of opportunity because 3 or 4 days before they farrow, they're going to disappear. And they may be gone with that litter of pigs from 2 to 4 weeks, and then they're going to show back up, and you've got more pigs to deal with. But we've got the pigs trained, and now we've closed our panels down, tied it to the gate, wired the gate open still, bent a panel over because that does represent a bit of a bottleneck in this area. And so you don't want pigs piling up, so we're going to cover that part right there in front of the gate. Now our trap's ready to go. Our pigs are trained. We're putting bait further and further and further back into the trap, and I can guarantee you when your pigs are comfortable enough to start laying down inside the trap, taking naps, you've got them. You're going to be successful with your trapping. In this particular trap, we're using a tripwire trigger that runs above the height of a pig, and then it runs down, and then really where the rubber meets the road's in this area where that wire is run about a foot off the ground. But we're going to feed these pigs with bait all the way back. The last thing, as I said, you want them to do is rush that trigger. You want them to feed their way back to allow time for the last pig to get inside. On these mechanical trip triggers, of course, the automated system, the remote trip, you've got an advantage there because you're going to be able to know what's coming in and out and know when to trip it. But on the mechanicals, you want to bait all the way back. And you can use a tripwire gate. This is a rooter stick where you fill the post hole with bait, and they root that stick and cause it to trip. We've gone to tire triggers. My colleague, Rob Deekhouse up at the Fort Worth Nature Center suggested we try this, and it works very, very well because it typically takes a larger pig to trip this trap, and as many of you know, the small pigs are the first to rush in. The larger ones hold back just a little bit, but as you go through this training process and get them comfortable going in and out of that trap, you can even get the largest pigs to be accustomed to that trap and go in. Okay, we've got our trap set, and we ought to be virtually guaranteed based on our camera data that when we decide to set that trap and bait all the way back to the trigger on that evening, that we're going to be guaranteed to catch those pigs overnight. So there's our trap ready to go. We've got our camera out front. As you can see, at 10:47 p.m., they're showing up. And at 10:55, 8 minutes later, it's all over. The gate's shut. There's the pigs in the back of the trap. I want them to be so far in the back of that trap they can't even hear the gate close. There they are in the daytime with that teardrop shape. We simply put a board down in front of the gate, have one person operate the trailer, get everybody else to stand back away from the trap, and then walk in from the wide end of the trap. The pigs will funnel away from you. As you come in from the wide end of the trap, move towards the trailer, and they'll load. Once that first pig goes in, it's pretty easy to get the rest to follow. And there's our peach-flavored porkers ready to go to the buying station. We've got 100 buying stations in the state. If you want to find the one nearest you, simply go to the Texas Animal Health Commission website, and they have a link to feral hog buying stations. It gives you their location, the contact name and phone number, and they pay you for the spot, on the spot for those pigs based on weight. Large pigs right now, 200 pounds plus, have been bringing in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 cents a pound. Typically, they'll pay for pigs down to about 50 to 80 pounds. That's about the minimum size most of the buying stations can deal with. And they weigh them, pay you for them on the spot so you can at least recoup some of your trapping costs. So a couple of quotes for you. You cannot trap what you cannot bait. Whatever you do, don't go through the time and effort of putting in a trap and setting it up until you know you've got those pigs on bait. And this is where the camera comes in. It'll save you a lot of legwork. There shouldn't be the need to run down on a succession of days to see if you caught pigs. when you follow this protocol and adopt these best management practices, once you set that trap to catch, barring any unforeseen circumstances, you ought to be guaranteed the next morning when you show up bright and early that you've got pigs in the trap. And once you set it to catch, you do need to be there early the next morning because the longer you leave pigs in the trap, the more time they have to figure out a way to get out. So successful trapping, match the trap size to the pig numbers. The larger the number of pigs in the sounder, the larger the trap. Use that small mesh paneling, 5 foot tall, and cover your corners if you go with a rectangular square trap. And go through this pre-baiting ritual. That's very important. Monitor by camera, and whatever you do, don't give up. Now, we've done some additional testing of some designs. Again, my colleague Rob Dinkhouse up at the Fort Worth Nature Center suggested this design. Think of a football with the noses lopped off, and we've got a double door trap. This is a 4-panel trap with 2 guillotine gates, and you can build this trap for less than $600, and it can be very, very effective. Basically, what happens is with this trap, it uses a tire trigger. The pigs trip one gate. The weight of that gate falling trips the second gate to fall almost instantaneously. And as a result, you've got an area that pigs can go in and out of, see all the way through the trap, and it's worked very, very well. You can use the guillotine gate design and just have a single door, no problem with that. But certainly this is an example of something we've looked at and tested here at Overton. The first time we set this particular gate with the 8-foot wide gate, we were able to catch the entire sounder of 21 pigs in one trip. And this is the shortest length of time that I've gone from pre-baiting to pulling the trailer up and backing it up against the trap to load them out. And from start to finish, it was 7 days. Now, I feel like that's a pretty short period of time. If your pigs have been trapped at and harassed and shot into, it may take longer. And certainly it has taken 2 and 3 weeks in some cases to get those pigs trained. But we have done it in as little as a week. We're looking at a different style trap also. This is the 9-door figure 8 trap. Sometimes your camera data will show you that you've got multiple sounders coming on different time schedules. And so you can catch one sounder in one end and catch the other sounder in the other end, force them all through a gate in the middle, and then load them out in the trailer. Here's an example of that with the figure 8 trap. We've got a single large boar at one end that was coming much later than the smaller pigs in the sounder, and we were able to capture both and then force him through and load all the pigs out to carry to the buying station. We've looked at all kinds of designs. There's some figure 6 or figure 9 designs, again, that don't necessarily incorporate a gate. But as I pointed out earlier, pigs, particularly large pigs, just don't like to force themselves through a tight spot. I'd invite you to come to our A&M Research and Extension Center here at Overton. We actually have a display set up on the front lawn that's available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, that you can look and see some of the trap designs that we're employing and measure and take pictures. We've also got a similar demonstration site at the Hopkins County Extension Office in Sulphur Springs, Texas. So if you're more in that part of the country, you can drop by there and take a look at their demonstration site as well. I'll leave you with 3 websites. These are all locations that you can look at information. Much of what I've discussed today is located at feralhogs.tamu.edu, a national website that is hosted by Texas A&M Extension. The community of practice can be found at extension.org/feralhogs. And then I have a wild pig page at the overton.tamu website here at the Texas A&M Center at Overton. So much more information can be gleaned from those sites. With that, I was able to just beat that sow to the top of the trap and get away from her, but I'll entertain any questions that we might have, Clint.
Dr. Higginbotham, that was lots of really good information. We've got some questions that have come in, and it looks like we still have most of the participants. We'll try and go through these as quickly as possible. Some of you may have covered already. So the first is, why does it seem like wild pigs have the boar-like tusks, but domestic pigs do not? Are the tusks actually teeth or tusks?
They're modified teeth, and I think it depends on the genetic background of the pigs as to how much you actually have those tusks develop in many cases. There are certain other things that can affect tooth development, diet, for example, but I think it's got most to do with some of the genetic background on these animals.
All right. The next one says, any concern about passing the diseases mentioned to whitetail?
Well, you know, I don't know that they have passed diseases to whitetails. They can certainly pass diseases to other animals, and I guess the potential exists there. But even if they don't, there's compelling reasons why a landowner or a hunter managing for native wildlife should be trying to reduce those pig populations anyway. I wouldn't put disease transmission anywhere near the top of my list of why to whitetails as to why to control the pigs, but certainly the behavior, disrupting the behavior of whitetails, competing for native food items as well as supplement. Those are of paramount importance in my mind, and good reasons why they should be controlled.
Okay. Can lice from wild pigs spread brucellosis and other diseases to humans during handling?
I don't think that's the case. I think you've got to have an open wound. I don't know. I don't know of cases where that's occurred. Perhaps if we've got someone with some veterinary background on the line, they can answer that better than I can. I will research that question, and if that individual can send us an email, I will respond back, or we'll post it on one of the websites. But I doubt that that's likely to occur. But here again, I can't say definitively, and I'll do a little more checking on that so we can get an answer.
Okay. The next one, we've covered some parts of it, so I'll get down to the end. Basically, this person's had a problem with coons setting off the trigger in their traps a lot. Is there any more specific way that would keep coons from triggering the trap?
Well, they're less likely to trigger a tripwire if it's set a little higher. They're less likely to trip a rooter stick because they can dig that feed or bait out of that hole without moving that stick. They're not going to set off a tire trigger. So by selection of your trigger, or by going with one of the remote trip trigger systems, you're going to greatly decrease the incidence of raccoons tripping traps. That was one of my big frustrations back in the early 80s of having a trough that we would attach our trigger wire to, and as the pigs would feed in that trough, they would trip the trigger to close the door. And what we would have is pigs set up on that trough, and that weight could cause them to trip. So by modifying your trigger, or by going to one of the remote trigger systems, if you choose to do that, you can really cut down on those false trips by not only raccoons, but raccoon-sized pigs. Again, I want a bigger pig to actually trip that trap on a mechanical triggered situation, because that means the little pigs are already in there. And once you get the big pigs in, you should be able to capture the entire sounder.
Okay. And the same person has a place that's around 125 acres, and their trap has been in one spot for a while now. They haven't caught anything in 8 to 10 months. How often should they move their trap around?
Well, my question is, are they seeing pig damage on different areas of their property away from that trap? We have traps that have been in the same place for 8 or 10 years. And that doesn't mean we've got pigs going to them all the time, but when we see sign or when we see damage, we'll start putting bait somewhere around that trap. Oftentimes we'll set up a deer feeder, wire the gate open, and set it to where that feeder will throw inside and outside the trap. Excuse me, and just monitor by camera. Now, people ask, well, what if we kill pigs in a trap? There's been a study conducted that in traps where pigs were euthanized, in 13 traps, 10 of those traps had more pigs in them the next week. So I'm not too concerned about that aspect. particularly with the larger corral trap. May be more of an issue with box traps. But you may not need to move your traps. You may just need to retrain them to that trap once you start seeing sign. That's the disadvantage of a corral trap. They're not as portable, but certainly just because they're in the same location doesn't mean they won't be effective in the future.
Okay, one person said along those lines that their pigs refuse to enter a trap after pigs have previously been caught there. Do you have any thoughts to get them, I guess, re-encouraged to go back in there?
I would just continue baiting. I'd wire my gate open. If that doesn't work, I would remove the gate and splay those end panels out, maybe 10 or 12 feet wide, and offer most of your bait outside the trap, and then where a little bit of that feed or bait can fall inside the trap, and just progressively move it further and further back. You should be able to retrain those pigs. You know, we used to think if we trapped pigs and turned them loose, that was it. They were trap-wise and would never come back. That is not the case, at least on our telemetry study pigs. We would trap pigs, put radio collars on them, and release them. And on 2 different occasions, we had the same pigs that we trapped, caught, held down, fit a radio collar on them, and released them back with the sounder. Those same pigs were back in the same trap 4 days later. So I'm not nearly as concerned about this trap-wise issue as a lot of people are. I think the process of getting them reacquainted with that trap, so to speak, by baiting on the outside, don't just expect them to go in the trap and bait and accept bait all the way at the back. Train them back at that throat or opening of that trap. If you have to remove the gate and splay it back open, so be it. Do what you have to do to get them trained, but you should be successful at training those pigs back into that existing trap.
Okay. Is it legal to hunt pigs at night with spotlights in areas where deer are known to roam? Seems
Absolutely.
like night hunting is illegal in those areas.
Absolutely, it's legal, and that's one of the strategic shooting techniques that we often employ because that's when the pigs are active and often in more open ground where you can get to them with firearms. Now, with one caveat, if you are going to be out there hunting pigs at night, do yourself a favor and call your game warden and let them know where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing. Keep in mind, 83 million acres of our deer habitat is pig habitat. And so where you've got pigs, you've typically got deer. But give your game warden a heads up that you're going to be on such and such a ranch on this night, spotlighting. So if a neighbor sees a spotlight or hears gunshots and they call the game warden, they'll say, hey, that's Joe. He called me this afternoon and told me where he was and what he'd be doing. So yes, night hunting is legal with permission from the landowner, but not from the road now, not from public roads or on public management areas. And but just give the game warden or the sheriff's office a heads up so they'll know what's going on. They don't like to come out at 3 o'clock in the morning if they don't have to.
All right. This question's back to trapping. It says, I noticed you were laying down a lot of corn on the ground, not a spinning type feeder, but by hand. Is this a better way to attract pigs, i.e. more corn on the ground?
I think if you're an absentee landowner, a deer feeder is an excellent tool. Let's say you're there, you know, you live in a metropolitan area and you're down there every weekend or every other weekend. Setting up a deer feeder and hanging a camera on that there at the trap is a great way to get those pigs trained in your absence. And then you check your camera data when you get there on Friday night. And if you've got pigs going in, then you can hand feed on into the trap if you want to, or reposition your deer feeder. But once you got them going in, they're creatures of habit, and they're going all the way to the back. Then with a mechanical trip, you're going to be successful. Of course, if you're using a remote trigger system, you may can trigger that trap from your house away from the ranch and be successful as well. But yeah, just kind of monitor, and we hand feed a lot, but that's because someone's in those pastures every day checking cows. They're not having to make an extra trip to go do that.
Okay, another trapping question. How high can feral hogs jump to get out of traps?
Well, you know, I said a 5-foot high panel is required. I have had a very small handful of pigs climb out of 5-foot high traps. Not enough to justify, in my opinion, doubling your panels or anything like that. But especially in areas where there's corners, or occasionally if you've got multiple pigs and one of them can get up on the back of the other one, and if they can get their front legs over the top of that trap, they're gone. And typically that 5 foot is going to be high enough, but you may lose a pig occasionally, but if it's designed right, your corners and throats are covered, you're not going to have many climb out in that situation.
Okay. Are traps that drop in from above better than other traps, I guess, say corral traps that are built on the ground?
This is a technique that some of the remote trigger traps use, and I think again, those pigs being able to look and not see any obstructions, they can see all the way underneath. I think that reduces training time and increases that pig's likelihood of going in that trap area quicker because they don't see any obstructions. This is one thing I talked about with that double door trap where they can act, they've got an opening on each end. They can see all the way through, or they can come in one end, go out the other. They're never too far away from being outside the trap. But for those traps that are suspended like that and they can see all the way underneath, yeah, I think there's some definite advantages to that design.
Okay. Getting towards the end of them here. One slide said that snares were used to take only 2% of the hogs taken. Are they less effective than pin or box traps?
I don't know that they're less effective. I don't think properly set snares, pigs ever catch on to them. I think they're a great tool. I just don't think there are as many people using them as compared to traps. Well, wildlife services biologists and technicians, they use a lot of snares, but they're careful where they set them. They read the sign, and they are highly effective at removing pigs with snares. No, I think it's a great technique. Again, it's a one pig at a time proposition, and it's no different than trapping. Once they're set, you've got to go back and check them the next day, just from an ethical standpoint. You don't want to leave those pigs in a snare for very long. So they're cheap. You can sell a lot of them, but they have to be checked daily.
Okay. Do you have anywhere, or is there a link that you can provide that has drawings to the trap gates that you talk about, the guillotine trap gates especially?
Yes, if you'll go to, it should be on all those websites, but in particular, if you'll go to overton.tamu.edu and go to the wild pig page, I have the discussions on the triggers, the various triggers that are mechanical, and also have the information on the gate design, the guillotine gate design. I've caught pigs with all of those gate designs. I don't want to misinform anyone. Swinging door gates, rooter gates, saloon door gates, they all work. I've caught pigs with all of them. But again, I'm looking at least cost. And if I can build a gate for $100 versus have to buy one for $200 or $300 or in some cases $400, I'm looking at least cost as much as possible, using materials that are readily available without having to have welding skills, which I have none of. And if you'll go to that overton.tamu.edu wild pig page, all of those details are located there.
Okay. You may have touched on this one some. We see some municipalities contracting nuisance removal services. Do we have legislature in the near future to see the state or federal government spend to do the same?
Well, it's interesting. APHIS, USDA APHIS, the federal agency dealing with pigs, is in the process of trying to develop an environmental impact statement on wild pigs nationwide. And so, yes, they are putting a game plan together to address pigs on a national basis. It's my understanding that in a recent budget nationwide, there was in the neighborhood of either 18 or $20 million allocated for wild pig efforts. Now, that may be a drop in the bucket when you look at it across the nation, but what that has told me is it's shown up on the radar screens at the national level, and that's important. Here in the state, There have been a number of programs conducted, some at the county level. The Texas Department of Agriculture has been very active beginning in 2006 with providing grants to agencies and universities to do some research, but primarily to work directly with landowners to abate damage through wild pig removal and by providing education, which is what we do with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, for those landowners to be able to deal with those pig issues themselves. So we've got it going on at the state level here in Texas. Obviously, some of the research I talked about on the toxicants, specifically the toxicant is sodium nitrite that is being researched. And again, federal agencies as well as state agencies such as Texas Parks and Wildlife have been big players in those efforts to try to get that product on the market. So there is a lot of activity in Texas, and it has shown up nationally now and had some funding placed towards it for the federal agencies to put a nationwide game plan together to try to address the wild pig issue, because I can assure you we are in a war with wild pigs in the state of Texas.
I completely agree. We've got 2 more questions left, and then we'll cut it off after that. One, I missed it a while ago. It says, do the Overton traps have triggers do the display traps at Overton have triggers in place?
Absolutely. You can go in and out of the traps. You can take pictures. We've got several triggers mechanisms on display. So yes, absolutely. Same with the Hopkins County Extension Office trap set up there in front of their office. They have their triggers in place. And so I learned something from other people trapping pigs every day. I don't have all the answers, and I've learned a lot over the last 30 years based on other people's successes. I firmly believe that all of us are smarter than one of us. And so if we can take this collective wisdom and make it available to landowners in a practical sense to where they can adopt it, put it on the ground, remove pigs, and decrease their damage, it's a win-win situation for all of us.
Okay, and then one last one that I saved till the very end. What do you suggest if you're working towards hog eradications but your neighbors are not?
Well, let's modify that and say reduction of damage, because we're not going to eradicate our pigs. I've often said that there's 2 types of landowners, those that have pigs and those that are about to have pigs. Here's your choices. Depending on the budget you have available, you could consider using net wire fencing and excluding those pigs from your property. If that's not possible, we have lots of cases where you're being damaged, but maybe those pigs are staying on your neighbor or maybe on the other side of that neighbor on a neighbor's neighbor, and then they're coming onto your property to do damage during the nighttime hours. This is very common. If you can't access where those pigs are staying during the daytime or to get close to that, you just have to attack them at the point of entry where they come onto your property. Read the sign, try to catch them as they're moving into your property, and set up to do your removal in that area. But you're probably going to be in the pig business on a sustained basis. You may get rid of them for now, but in a month, 2 months, 6 months, you're probably going to have pigs reappear on the property. And when you have pigs appear, you have damage occur. But you just have to stay after them. Many of these areas where there's no hunting, or perhaps it's an absentee landowner that never visits the property, end up serving as sanctuaries for these pigs. And that's where they stay during the daylight hours because they're not being harassed. So this is not an uncommon situation to be wanting to control the pigs and having the damage, but the neighbor not having any interest in doing so. And so in those cases, you can either exclude or you can address those pigs, try to catch them as they're first entering your property and deal with them on that basis.